So here we have a prime leg and chump of Scotch lamb, and I'm going to prepare this into a boneless Carvery roast. First of all, I'm going to remove the H-bone, lifting the little fillet up, and then go into the seams and remove the rest of the bones. Because the leg and chump is a small primal piece, care is needed when working around the bones that we don't use too much of the point of the knife so as to dig in to the underlying muscles. So I'm working closely around the bone. This is the hip bone, coming around the ball and socket of the leg, but just working closely so as not to cut into the underlying meat. As I say, this has had the chump or the rump left on the leg rather than being left on the end of the loin. So that's the H-bone out. There's the head of the main leg bone. Next, I'm going to just remove some of the excess fat and gristle that lies over the area of the top side muscle. And by just removing that little bit of fat, it also enables me to see the seams of the muscles underneath. I'm going to now is take off this top side muscle. I'm going to go down the back of the bone, again just using the point of the knife, down onto the main bone, and then work around that bone, coming up, finding that internal seam, finding the way with the end of my finger rather than trying to find it with the knife, and then just working through that seam, as you can see there, through the seam, between the muscle groups, and that will now enable me to follow that right the way through to the external edge of the fat, and then taking that top side muscle off in one piece. So that's the top side muscle. And now I can see the inside part of the leg, the main leg bone. I'm going to work around this, around the rest of the leg, to remove the remaining bones. So again, still taking a little care not to cut too heavily into the underlying muscle, onto the underside of the main leg bone. Here I want to take out the shank, or the knuckle part of the leg. I'm going to leave this on the bone for another cut or product, but I want to follow the seam along from the Achilles tendon, this thick gristle that we've got here. So following that seam up, and that takes me to basically the back of the knee. Here is the knee of the animal. There's the joint, and I can cut through that knee joint and remove that knuckle or shank in one piece, and that is then ready for further processing. So back to the main leg, I can now continue to remove the main leg bone. Right, that comes. And my final bone that's left is the kneecap. So again, closely working around that bone to remove. So now we have a totally boneless leg of lamb, but we can see internal pockets of fat and silver gristles and tendon. So it's now a matter of cleaning this piece of boneless meat up, ready for forming into a Carvery roast joint. So it's going around the inside of the leg and removing the internal pockets of fat, any silver gristles or tendons. There's a triangular wedge of fat here further down in the leg. That's coming out. I'm not removing all the fat, it's just the excessive pockets and large visible areas. I'm cutting off the thickest part of that tendon. Silver gristle, again just knife under the gristle and skinning that off, because if that's left into the joint, that goes hard during the cooking process. Checking around the fillet area, excess fat, a little bit of blood meat and vein. Trimming that off. So basically all we're doing is removing the plate waste. So when this is prepared into the Carvery roast, all you're doing is cooking a totally edible product, and when you come to carve, everything that's carved and ends on the plate is totally edible. Large wedge of fat here along the side of that muscle. Again, I'm just going to closely cut along the side of that muscle to remove that wedge of fat. And then just as a final check, making sure that I've checked the external side. Is the fat level even? Am I happy with everything? One little bit here is a central core of a high gristle muscle, high in collagen. So I'm just going to remove that center core muscle out of the leg. Very high in gristle connective tissue. So rather than spoil the joint, I'm taking that out, and that'll go for further process in the dice. So now, once I'm happy, that is a completely boneless trimmed leg. I need now to put this into some sort of uniform shape and string ready for roasting. So I'm just going to tuck that little bit of tail in on the underside, so I've got something nice uniform in shape. And here I'm just going to use a combination of butcher's twine and some elasticated roasting bands. I'm going to use the roasting bands for the majority of the joint. So I'm just going to put 3 retaining bands on at the moment, just to keep it in that uniform shape. I'm going to put 1 retaining string down the center, and that will stop it from opening up during cooking. I want it to stay in this uniform shape so that when cooked is ideal for portion controlling. Not over tying the joint, because I don't want the strings or the bands to start squeezing the juice out during cooking. So my central tie is just to keep it nicely together, and then we will finish off putting 2 or 3 more retaining bands around that leg. Nice thing about the bands is that we can actually move them into getting a nice uniform spacing. And there is our boneless Carvery lamb roast.